Okay, welcome back, everyone. I am your host, Andrew Corns, and I am joined alongside a couple of guys today. I've got Dan Sashanik.
How's everybody doing?
Good. How are you, Dan?
Oh, I'm doing great.
And I've got Sean Jeffries, who has a coffee mug that I wish I could share with you, but we'll just keep it as an internal joke. Sean, how's it going today?
Doing okay.
Okay, and we will have Greg Bussman alongside us at some point. Greg has a little issue going on with his computer, but he'll pop in when he gets time, so you'll hear from Greg here in a little bit. Before we get into this episode, this marks a special milestone for our podcast that I just wanted to kind of let you guys know. I don't know if you're aware. This is episode number 50 for us. That's kind of a podcasting milestone. And I just want to take a moment to say, I think we appreciate everyone who's listened to us over the last couple of years that we've been doing this. 50 is not an easy number. I actually pulled up a couple of stats, and there's over 850,000 podcast channels. Only 18% of them go past 2 episodes.
Wow.
And half of all podcasts, so over 400,000 podcasts that are out there, have never made it past a single episode. So the fact that we've churned along somehow for 50 episodes, I think is a pretty good feather in our cap. So
heck yeah.
We'll keep going along. Maybe we'll reach 100. Who knows where this thing's going to go? But we're having fun doing it, and that's the point, right?
Definitely.
We're going to get hired by ESPN next. Sports Network.
Yeah, if you yeah, you never know where we're gonna go. Okay,
well, St. Louis sports radio is pretty lenient about the kinds of people they hire. No, I'm kidding.
Right.
Sports radio is great here. You never know. Even a guy like me could make it.
I'm not going to take a dig at any of them in particular. Maybe another day, another time. I've got a few in mind. But Bernie Miklasz isn't on the radio, and that makes me happy. So. Okay, it is June still, so it's still Pride Month. If you listened last week, we're going to do a Pride Spotlight to start every show. So basically what we're going to do is just kind of go around, and if you have an athlete you want to kind of mention and highlight from the LGBTQ community, I'm going to start this off really quickly. I've got a couple in mind, and then I think Sean's got some good ones as well. So the first one that I wanted to mention today was Laurel Hubbard. I was not aware of Laurel Hubbard until a couple weeks ago, but Laurel is a New Zealand athlete set to become the first openly transgender athlete to compete at the Olympic Games this summer in weightlifting. So Laurel will be competing as a woman. The only caveat is the Olympics are requiring testosterone levels below 10 nanos per liter for 12 months before competition. So up to this point, we're about a month away from the Olympics. Laurel has met the testosterone levels so far. So by all accounts, Laurel will be competing in the Olympics for New Zealand. I wish her all the best. And my second athlete is Rob Kearney. Rob is one of my absolute favorite follows on Instagram. Rob is a professional strongman representing the United States. And Rob has maybe my single favorite Instagram tag, if you will. And Rob's tag is World's Strongest Gay. He embraces being gay. He embraces who he is. I love everything about what I see from Rob. He actually considers coming out as gay to have catapulted his career in strongman. So instead of a lot of athletes kind of being afraid that then coming out is going to hurt their reputation and hurt their status, Rob's actually increased his status from coming out. And so I think that's really awesome to see. And Rob is very noticeable by his rainbow-colored mohawk. So I would recommend if you ever watch a strongman competition, look out for Rob Kearney. He's a blast to watch. He's a good follow on Instagram if you can find him on World's Strongest Gay. And Sean, I'm going to turn it over to you. I think you've got one as well.
Yeah, this has been a great feature for me personally because I've been able to discover some new athletes and some new folks that are making changes in the way that we view sports. I want to highlight today. Her name is Andrea Yearwood. She is currently a college student at North Carolina Central University, and she is a runner, a trans runner, and was in high school in Connecticut and was involved in running there and won some races, didn't win every race, but along with another trans athlete that was running with her, they got involved in a lawsuit that you see so many of these things popping up where local and state governments especially are trying to limit the inclusion of trans athletes in high school sports, and the case was eventually dropped. But she has since, like I said, she graduated from high school. She went on to college. She's still running. She was a 21 and under honoree from Teen Vogue magazine. She was a 2019 Action Award recipient from Athlete Ally, and has really sort of been, a new voice in the LGBTQ plus community in sort of this very specific area of where they're trying to limit all of these athletes' abilities to compete in high school sports in particular. And just a great thing to see a young person who has a little bit of experience with it and trying to help educate people more, because that seems to be her point on what the greatest problem is, that people just aren't as educated about the topic of trans athletes to play sports, and people think that some athletes are only in it to win medals or get trophies, and as far as she's concerned, that's almost never the case. And one kind of misunderstanding should not impact whether kids can play soccer or run or basketball or football or anything across the country, and taking away their right to play these sports just is cruel and unusual. And so she was a nice highlight for that, I think, to bring it a little bit more personal touch to it. And there is a documentary coming out on Hulu called Changing the Game, which follows 3 high school trans athletes, including Andrea. It actually came out in 2019, sorry. So that's something that you can take a look at to see her. You can follow her, Andrea W-A, on Twitter, and just educate yourselves, folks.
That's awesome. I'm going to definitely look for that documentary, Sean. I was not aware of Andrea, so that's really cool. And that's the point of this thing, is to try and hopefully, if you're listening, even some of us are learning a lot of these athletes that we're not familiar with, and that's the point, is to shine the spotlight on them. And like Sean said, it's all about education at this point, because I think all of us can learn to be better educated about the trans athlete community and the LGBT community as a whole. And I also wanted to, before we switch subjects, there's a community here in St. Louis that I wanted to give a plug to, and St. Louis City SC, our new soccer team, is very progressive and very involved in Pride Month themselves. And one of their supporter groups, probably the most prominent supporter group here in St. Louis, is called the St. Louligans. And inside of the St. Louligans, there's a new branch that's been created called the Thieves, and they're on Twitter. You can find them. And the Thieves are perfect for this particular segment because they were created by and for members of marginalized groups that live outside the middle class, outside the cisgender and heterosexual white male demographic. They include unhoused, those stuck in the justice system, military veterans, people with disabilities, people of color, women, and most directly, they're related to pride in the LGBT community. They have 3 main goals. That's to provide a safe and welcoming space for members of marginalized groups to enjoy the sport they all love, which is soccer. Hold those who do or say anything opposed to their first goal accountable for those words or actions. And third, supporting local organizations that work to help these marginalized groups, both monetarily and through volunteering. So currently, the Louligans as a whole are participating in a Pride Raiser this month to raise money for Pride St. Louis. You can make pledges at Fire and Ice or Scott Gallagher, all the different St. Louis soccer clubs around here. And you can also find more about the Thieves on Facebook at the Thieves STL. You can find them on Instagram, you can find them on Twitter, or you can go to thieves.stlouligans.com. So wanted to give them a plug because they're doing a lot of positive stuff here in the community in the soccer world. Okay, we're going to switch now over to a couple of playoff sports going on. We're going to start with the NBA. It's pretty exciting stuff what's going on in the NBA playoffs right now. Before we get into the series that are actually happening, there's one kind of looming shadow over the NBA playoffs, and whether he's playing or not, it's LeBron James. He's got the largest shadow that casts across basketball. He's out after the first round with the Lakers. A lot of people are still wondering a week or so on from the Lakers getting eliminated, does this loss in the first round impact LeBron James and his legacy most notably in the comparisons that always come up between him and Michael Jordan. Sean, you briefly touched upon this last week, so I want to go to you first. What do you think about the idea that LeBron James and his legacy has somehow been negatively impacted by going out last week in the playoffs?
I think it's ridiculous to think that. There's no reason in the world that this loss should affect anything at all that he's already done. Is the argument going to be that, well, Michael Jordan never went to the playoffs and lost in the first round? Is that the argument? Because I don't know, but it seems very silly to me. All of the success that he's had, if he made it to the playoffs again, then that's him. Just another notch in the hat, whether you lose in the first round or not, as far as I'm concerned. But just to think that it somehow diminishes his career legacy, to me, is nonsense.
It's funny because the Jordan fanatics that are out there that exist that won't. There's a large segment of basketball fans who refuse to acknowledge anything but Michael Jordan is the greatest. And like you said, Sean, what they always go to when LeBron comes up is once Jordan won a single championship with the Bulls, he never went another full season with the Bulls without winning a championship. However, they like to also gloss over the fact that he retired in the middle of his prime to go play baseball for a year and a half. He came back after, and played a half year of basketball in '95. Actually got knocked out in the second round of the playoffs that year. He hadn't played the full year, so he wasn't fully up to speed. But they like to kind of forget about the fact that Jordan went out 3 times in the first round leading up to him finally breaking through and winning a championship. This is LeBron's first ever time over the course of his career that he's gone out in the first round. And the other thing that people aren't talking about is the Lakers and the Heat primarily. They both went out in the first round this year. They played in the finals last year, and they each had the shortest offseason in professional sports history. And I feel like nobody's really talking about that. To basically play a season in a bubble, win a championship, have about 3 or 4 weeks of an offseason, especially for an aging team like the Lakers. LeBron needs that 3-month window of an offseason to kind of recuperate. And you could see it all year with the Lakers. They were injured a lot. LeBron and Anthony Davis just couldn't get right. I think there was a mental fatigue around that team that short offseason definitely hurt his ability to perform this offseason. So I'm kind of writing it off. I don't think it damages his legacy one bit, especially when you look at the fact that he made at one point he's made the NBA Finals 10 times, I believe 9 consecutively at one point. He's played 266 playoff games, which is the equivalent of 3 full seasons. And at this point in Michael Jordan's career, he had already retired for good and retired twice at that point. So the idea that this LeBron is somehow ruining his reputation by still making deep playoff runs consistently is just crazy to me. I think he needs the summer off. He's going to Space Jam's coming out this summer. He's going to do a big promotional tour around being in Space Jam. I think he's going to kind of refocus, get his head back into it. Next year, I expect the Lakers to be very prominent and probably make a deep run in the playoffs. So, it's nonsense to me. I love LeBron. I love Michael Jordan, but I can also kind of distance myself from the argument and say the idea that this is hindering LeBron is total fabrication by people who want to still clutch to number 23, Michael Jordan. So we've also got some basketball. Right? What's that?
Did I just hear LeBron's changing his number for next season to back to 6?
Changing it back to 6. He tried to do it a year ago, but I think he missed the deadline technically, and the Lakers didn't want him to because they'd already done a big print on number 23 jerseys, and they were afraid it was going to create a big hullabaloo. But he's going back to 6. If you remember, he went to 6 in Miami and played really well in 6. I don't care what number he wears. Kobe wore 2 different numbers throughout the course of his career. Who cares? Yeah. Just a jersey number.
One of those superstition things that a lot of professional athletes have, I think. Yeah. Where like, I'm going to change my number back to 6. I had success with it in Miami, and so that will translate to success for me now. Maybe not, but
if it makes him happy, good for him. I don't care.
Yeah.
A number's a number to me. Okay, so we've still got a lot of basketball happening right now. We've got 8 teams left in the playoffs. Really good teams in the West. Really good teams out in the East. First question, I want to go to you guys. Primarily, I want to go to you, Sean. What team I'm calling it the Wild West right now because you've got 4 teams who none of them have actually ever won an NBA championship as a franchise. We're talking the Phoenix Suns, the Denver Nuggets, the Utah Jazz, Los Angeles Clippers. Who of those 4 teams do you think is actually going to come out of that West? Because it's kind of wide open right now at this point.
I think we're going to see a Suns, Jazz, I guess, semifinal in the West. And I think the Suns are going to come out on top. I think there's a couple of really great series happening already, despite the fact that Utah's up 2-0 against the Clippers. I think that series could have gone either way already, and so that one's going to be a little bit, end up being fairly contentious. I don't think the Nuggets are going to be able to hang with Phoenix at all for the rest of this series. But I'm going to take the Suns coming out of the West. The sun usually sets in the West, but this time it's going to be coming out of the West to dominate the rest of that conference, I suppose.
I was hoping we'd have a different pick, but I've got to kind of fall in line on the same. A couple different reasons as to why I'm going to go with it. I also think we're looking at Suns Jazz. I'm definitely not writing out the Clippers at this point. They're down 0-2, but if you remember, they went down 0-2 to Dallas and still came back and won that series. They've got Kawhi Leonard. He's a 2-time champion. They've got Paul George. They've got a head coach, Ty Lue, who's won championships with Cleveland. They know what they're doing. I expect the Clippers to make that a series, but I just like the Jazz and the makeup of that team. Donovan Mitchell coming into his own as a superstar. They've got the Defensive Player of the Year, Rudy Gobert. I like the chemistry with Utah. However, the Suns are the team to me that I can't not be impressed with. I mean, they beat the Lakers, and I don't think that's all on the Lakers being tired. I think the Suns really did outplay them, and I think that all comes down to the guy, the point guard, if you will, as he's called, CP3, Chris Paul. It's absolutely fascinating to me what Chris Paul's doing with Phoenix right now. So, to give you a little backstory, Chris Paul had a falling out 2 years ago with the Houston Rockets. He and James Harden could not get along. Houston decided to ship him off to Oklahoma City. Oklahoma City said, we're just going to tank this year. We're going to retain Chris Paul's contract, but we're going to tank. Chris Paul said, that's not happening. Somehow dragged this awful Thunder team to the playoffs, made them a really relevant team last year in the bubble. Then the Thunder decided to trade him to Phoenix because they didn't want him anymore. They wanted to kind of stick to that tank model, and they're like, we can't tank with Chris Paul because he's going to win. So he gets shipped off to Phoenix. Phoenix has been a wasteland for about a decade right now. They've got a young player in Devin Booker. He's 24. He's a superstar in the making. He's already had a game in his career where he scored 70 points. I mean, a 70-point game from a kid under 24 is crazy. They've got DeAndre Ayton, another young talent. All the Phoenix Suns were missing was a leader, and Chris Paul kind of plugs in. He doesn't have an offseason, as I already talked about. There was basically no time to kind of get up to speed with an offseason. There was no preseason. He just got plugged into Phoenix, and they became a really, really good team. I have no idea how he was overshadowed in the MVP race. I've told you guys before, whether it's hockey, basketball, the MVP is hard. It's so hard to define because people just look at stats. And if you look at Chris Paul on his stat sheet, it doesn't always scream to you because he's not scoring 40 a night. But in Game 2, he had 15 assists and no turnovers. He's actually the only player in NBA history to do that, 15 assists and no turnovers with 3 different teams in his playoff career. So wherever Chris Paul goes, he's going to be good and he's going to win. He's never won a championship, so he's got that chip on his shoulder. He's got a bunch of young guys with energy. I liked Phoenix, and I think if Phoenix makes it through the West, we'll get to the East here in a second. I think if Phoenix makes it through the West, they probably got the best makeup to go up against the team that I think is coming out of the East. So I'm rooting for Phoenix. I like what they do. I'd like to see Chris Paul win a championship to kind of solidify what's been a Hall of Fame career. So Sean and I both got the Suns. We'll see if that – Dan, you're laughing over there. I'm curious what you've got to say on this.
I was going to say, you said exactly what I was going to say. Exactly.
I had a feeling we were on the same wavelength.
Actually, I'm gonna go off on a whim here, and I'm gonna say those people in Colorado, they love their Nugs, so we're gonna go for the Nuggets. I think the Nuggets can then come back and surprise somebody, at least make it a series.
Hey, I like what the Nuggets do. I just think that they're missing the key piece for them. They've got the MVP this year, Nikola Jokic, but they're missing Jamal Murray. He's their point guard. If they had Jamal Murray healthy, he's recovering from, I believe, an ACL injury. If it's Jamal Murray against Chris Paul, that's a matchup I'd love to have watched, and I think that gives Denver a better chance. I just can't see Jokic carrying that team, being kind of a point center, but I'm going to put you down on record for that pick, Dan, anyway.
Woo!
I think if the Suns win tonight, that it's all over for Denver.
Yeah, I do too. I'm giving Denver the game tonight, but I still think Phoenix probably wins in 6 or 7. I like the makeup and the chemistry of that team, a mix of veterans with that young energy. Switching over to the East, you've again got 4 really good teams right now. The Sixers and the Hawks are even at 1 game apiece. Last night there was a really good game in Milwaukee. Brooklyn was up 2-0. Milwaukee scrapped their way back into that series. It's 2-1. I had personally picked the Bucks to come out of the East. I thought they were going to make it to the finals. I'm not sure if I feel so confident on that. I want to go to you, Sean. Do you think the Brooklyn Nets, based on what you've seen so far, are this unstoppable force, or do you think maybe Milwaukee can kind of claw their way back into the series? How do you see the East shaking out at this point?
I think with injuries, I think that the Bucks still have a good chance to come back and tie that series up at least. They're my personal favorite in the East right now. A lot of that has to do with Giannis, but I'm not sure that he can carry them through unless they are able to somehow neutralize, the other 2 of the big 3 for Brooklyn. I kind of see Brooklyn coming out of that series. I think whoever wins the Hawks-Sixers series, though, is going to win the East. I think that's maybe the best series going on right now. They also play tonight, and that's a game I would definitely want to watch, the 76ers and the Hawks.
Yeah, if I had to pick a team I'm kind of rooting for outside of Phoenix, it's Atlanta right now. Based on what Trae Young did in New York, he elevated his superstar status to a pretty high degree. When you do that kind of stuff at Madison Square Garden, he's built for the playoffs. If you watch him, he's got a swagger about him. He's happy to kind of get into it with the opposing fans. He's not afraid to kind of be the villain, if you will. He seems like kind of a lightning rod for Atlanta. They've got a really good core of shooters around him. I like the makeup of that team. I'm picking them to beat the Sixers. I'm a little skeptical of Joel Embiid and his situation right now with that torn meniscus. I hate doing this. I usually try to stick with my picks pre-playoffs if I can, but I'm coming off of the Bucks. They've failed me the last 2 years. Giannis is a 2-time reigning MVP up until this year. I thought things were different this year. I thought they added Drew Holiday that kind of rounded out having Giannis, Holiday. They have Chris Middleton. I thought they had kind of a quiet confidence about them. For whatever reason, they cannot match up very well with the Brooklyn Nets. I know last night was they got the win, but they held the Brooklyn Nets to 83 points. That's never happening again, ever. I mean, there's no way you stop Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving from scoring more than 85 points. I had question marks about Kevin Durant and could he come back from that Achilles injury. That's a really hard injury in sports to come back from. We're 2 years removed from that. He looks every bit the best player in the world right now. I think Kevin Durant's returned to 100% health. I think that he and Kyrie just kind of get each other. They're kind of weird personalities that mesh. I wasn't sure if the chemistry was going to work. It certainly is at this point. And I think there's a fundamental flaw with Giannis. As much as I love him and the exuberance he plays with, if Giannis can't develop a shooting touch at any point in his career, he's going to have a hard time winning a championship kind of as the number 1 guy. Because what Brooklyn's doing is they're basically just saying, Giannis, you sit at the 3-point line, and we'll let you jack up threes all you want because we don't think you're going to hit 3-pointers on us. And Milwaukee really doesn't have enough shooting talent around Giannis. They're kind of built on defense. They're kind of built on interior play. I don't know if the NBA right now is that kind of a style where that can win. I think that the way the Nets space the floor, they've got Blake Griffin. Everything about the Nets to me kind of feels like a 2021 NBA team. I don't see them getting eclipsed by anybody, and I see the Nets making the finals. It pains me because I don't like James Harden and I don't really like Kyrie Irving, but I think that team and those 3 superstars are so talented they can kind of get past everything else. So in my head, I'm kind of seeing Nets and Suns, and I'm going to probably root for the Suns if we get to that point. But I still think there's a lot of pieces of play in the East, and anyone could come through there depending on what happens.
I think it'll be fun to watch the minutes played by some of these top guys for both teams in the second half, because that's what made the difference in the game yesterday, that the Bucks were able to kind of squeak out, because the scoring in the first half was much, I think, quicker, more. It was a faster pace, and there were a lot more points pouring in the first half. In the second half, it just all tightened down, and it was kind of back and forth. I don't know if that's because the Bucks found some new way to defend those guys, or if the Nets were, struggling keeping up minutes with some of their top guys. But they play on Sunday, so that'll be a good afternoon event to take on Sunday.
Yeah, it was a weird game, because after the first quarter, the Bucks were up like 31-11, and then from that point on, the Bucks only scored about 55 points in the final three quarters, and the Nets kind of turned it on, and both benches had less than 10 points total. I think the bench points were like 7-6, which is, again, something you never see in basketball. So I'm kind of ruling out Game 3 and thinking the Nets are going to bounce back, but I'd maybe say whoever wins on Sunday might end up winning the series. I think if Brooklyn goes up 3-1, it's done. If Milwaukee can claw their way back in, make it kind of a dogfight, maybe Brooklyn crumbles. That's what I'm hoping for, but who knows at this point. So,
I'm sorry,
what you got, Dan?
I thought it was funny that 5 of the teams that are still in the playoffs have not won a finals, and the 3 that are still in there, the Hawks, the Bucks, and the 76ers. The 76ers, total they have 5, and the 76ers have 3 of those. The Bucks one came in the 50s.
Yeah, with Kareem.
So I'm just excited that, for one, a West team is going to be the first time, or might be the first time they're going to be in the final, and if the West team wins, that's going to be the first for any of those teams that are there. So
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because like I said a couple weeks ago, the knock on the NBA playoffs, which as an NBA fan I can understand the criticism, it's that we always get Lakers, we always get Celtics, we always know who's going to win the title a lot of times at the start of the season. All bets are off at this point, and you've got a lot of unknowns and a lot of teams that have never experienced this. So I think it's really cool as a casual fan to pick an underdog, because they're pretty much all underdogs at this point, really.
Yeah, I totally agree. The uncertainty makes it, for me, a lot more interesting to watch. Not having a set result that's already kind of inevitable.
And you can sense it from all the fan bases, because if you look at these home crowds, a lot of them have never experienced playoff basketball like this, and they all know they've got a real chance. So I think the atmosphere is going to get more increased with each round. A lot of fun still to come from basketball. So we'll talk about NBA playoffs next week for sure. We're going to switch over to the Stanley Cup playoffs, which had effectively, in my opinion, the finals series finished last night, but we'll kind of determine if that's the case or not. So Vegas Golden Knights got the job done last night against the Colorado Avalanche, 1-6. So we've got our semifinals set. We've got Vegas and Montreal. We've got Tampa against the Islanders. I think there's a clear favorite in each of those series, but we'll kind of determine what we think is going to happen at this point. First question to you guys. Right now, are the Golden Knights the number 1 favorite to win the championship, in your opinion, win the Stanley Cup? Sean, do you think the Golden Knights are your favorite?
No. If I had to pick a favorite based on what I think would happen, it would be the Lightning. My favorite is the Islanders. And talking about the atmosphere from the NBA playoffs, if you want to talk about atmosphere, watch a game, go to a game. I would give my right arm to go to a playoff game this season at Nassau Coliseum. That place sounds like a European football stadium mid-match. It's loud. It's so loud. The fans are singing, they're chanting the whole time, and it's really fun to watch. I think Vegas kind of made the statement after getting wiped off the ice at the beginning of that series, that they came back and said, look, we're the team to beat in the West, not the upstart Colorado Avalanche. And so I think that would be, a strong finish for them to get to the final and to win a cup. But I still have to kind of lean on the defending champions a little bit with the team they have and the guys that they've got and the goaltending that they have. But Vegas matches up pretty well with them. And I think Vegas will easily handle Montreal, who has had a really nice run. Carey Price has kind of carried them. But Montreal's got a lot of young, exciting hockey players, and I think that'll be a fun series to watch. I don't think we're going to see blowouts in that series like we did before in the first one. And all from here on out, I think it's going to be real tight on both sides.
Just real quick, what would you predict the two series end in? Do you have a games in mind?
I think 6 games probably in the West, and maybe 5 or 6 in the East. I'm really pulling for the Islanders to feed on that energy at the Coliseum and kind of upset Tampa. That would be something else. But there isn't much I like better than watching Boston lose. And if you happen to see the end of that game in particular, 2 empty net goals, and crazy empty net goals too, not like gimmies where they, the second one was just literally just a clearing attempt, and it went off the boards and the perfect angle all the way down the ice. Would have been an icing, but it went right in the middle of the net, and it was kind of like, oh gosh, another one, and it was this.
Well,
I think it was
like you were saying, the crowd was chanting New York Saints. After the whole incident with Bruce Cassidy complaining about the officials and this and that, and I thought Nassau was going to fall in on itself. Like, that stadium's so old.
It was rocking.
Yeah. I'm a little concerned that if the Islanders make it to the finals, that stadium cannot withstand the pressure of that crowd. But yeah, the Islanders fans have definitely won the playoffs so far with the energy in that building. I mean, it's cool to see the Islanders back in prominence, because it's been quite a long time since the Islanders have had a really competitive team.
An Islanders win, even just this series to get to the final, might literally blow the roof off of the Coliseum.
Yes.
You're right.
Dan, where do you stand on the two series? Do you think Vegas is the favorite in all of it? How do you kind of see the rest of the playoffs shaking out?
Well, I think it's kind of funny. I'm getting to the point now that that 2 teams that I wouldn't really say squeaked into the playoffs, but got in there in the fourth, they're looking the best. The Islanders and the Canadians are looking the best right now. Although, I mean, you're comparing them. I mean, it's Tampa Bay and the Golden Knights. So, you got 4 awesome teams that are competing right now for this championship. And however it goes, I'm excited to. There's only one scenario I don't want to see, and that is the Lightning winning. Only because they just won it. So how cool would it be if the Islanders, a team that we only talked about in the 80s, won it, or the Knights, who have been there since, have been a team to beat since they entered the league, which gives so much hope for Seattle. And then the Canadians, the Canadians are, if you think of one team that just, feels of a whole country, it's the Canadians, so.
Even Toronto's somehow backing the Canadians to win this series, which is just, something's wrong when Toronto's back in Montreal.
Oh yeah.
Toronto backed the Canadians back, 3 or 4 months ago, and they knew the Canadians were going to take this.
So, who would you say is going to get through the 2 rounds if you had to predict?
I'm gonna do this with heart without saying specifics, but I'm gonna go with the Islanders and the Canadians, and the Canadians. I'd like to see them. I like to see them win it all.
Okay.
Which is totally blown my brackets or whatever, but once again, I just kind of throw darts at a wall when I do my brackets, and I never really think about that. Remember that, everybody. When I do my brackets, I don't actually put thought
Well, I'm going to humble brag on my bracket because of the three of us here. I'm the only one with both of my finalists still standing. I had Vegas over Tampa. I've seen 0 so far in the playoffs to make me waver from that at all. I'll kind of really quickly run through each of the teams, kind of where I see them. I felt like if Vegas got past Minnesota, that was the matchup that scared me with Vegas because they just didn't match up well with Minnesota in the regular season. Obviously, Minnesota took them, as far as they could go. I feel like Vegas at this point has kind of they're gonna get easier rounds each progressive round, in my opinion. I think that Vegas knows how close they are. I think they're going to unfortunately run through Montreal. I feel bad for Carey Price, but I don't think that Montreal line for line can match up with Vegas. And I think that Montreal has benefited a little bit from the fact that the North Division was not particularly strong. There was a lot of parity in there. They, if they were in any other division, they probably wouldn't have made the playoffs. It's a cool story. It's also kind of weird to see Montreal be the underdog when the Canadiens are historically the most celebrated franchise in hockey. So there's this weird kind of dichotomy between historically a Montreal Canadiens team, and yet this team feels very much like a ragtag group of underdogs. So I think Vegas is going to cruise past them. I also want to mention the Avalanche. I feel like everyone kind of drank the Avalanche Kool-Aid, especially after Game 1. And I kept telling people, the Avalanche are basically the Edmonton Oilers with a defense and a goalie. And by that, I mean the Avalanche are built on one line, and that's a very impressive line. And it's like a God mode line in a video game. However, at some point, that line is going to have a game or a period or a series of games where they don't play up to snuff, and the other team's going to figure them out. And when Vegas can roll out a second line with Marchessault and Smith, and they've got a third line with Janmark on it, I think that Vegas is so top to bottom strong that once they figured out Colorado went down pretty quickly. And I've got a couple of notes on Colorado. So in Game 1, that was that blowout. The top line, McKinnon, Rantanen, and Landeskog, they had 8 points combined in that first game. The rest of the series, they had 9 points combined. So once that line dropped even a little bit, Colorado kind of got exposed for what they are, which is a team that's still building. They still have to round out the second line, the third line. They need to kind of flesh out the defense a little bit. Questions will be, Grubauer's a free agent. Is Grubauer the right guy to lead that team to a cup? Maybe, maybe not. So I think Colorado is still building. They're still young. They've got the future ahead of them. Vegas just felt more ready right now. They've got veterans, Pacioretty, Pietrangelo, Fleury. They kind of know what they're doing. So it didn't surprise me that Vegas figured it out. I feel like everyone just kind of drank the Kool-Aid too much with the Colorado. And Tampa is just it's hard to put words on what Tampa is because they've got the best goalie in hockey. They're deep. They're talented. The Kucherov situation, I didn't expect him to have 0 rust coming back, but he's going to win the Conn Smythe if they make the finals at this point. It feels like even if they lose because what he's done.
He's just going to get better and better too, I think.
That's the thing.
The next series rolls on.
Yeah, he's scary, and they've got Victor Hedman, who's a Norris finalist. I mean, there's no hole I can find in Tampa, kind of like Vegas. But I also want to mention, I'm going to pull it back to the Blues. This whole Final Four that we're looking at kind of reminds me of the errors of the Blues, and it's all being kind of accentuated right now because 3 of the 4 teams have guys that I think should still be wearing the blue note. Number 1 is Pat Maroon. Pat Maroon is making $900,000 with Tampa. He would have happily stayed in St. Louis for $900,000. You better believe he would have. We're paying Kyle Clifford $1 million. We're paying Mackenzie McEachern $900,000. You better believe I'd rather have Pat Maroon in the locker room on the ice over those 2 guys. So that was an error on Doug Armstrong's part that Tampa's benefiting from. Number 2, Jake Allen. Jake Allen obviously hasn't played in the playoffs right now, but he's backed up Carey Price. And Carey Price doesn't turn into this version of Carey Price if Jake Allen doesn't play a pretty good chunk of regular season games and allows Carey Price to get healthy for the first time in several years. So without Jake Allen being a significantly good backup, probably the best backup in the league, Carey Price doesn't have that time to get his body ready and to go on this great playoff run. Allen's contract is going to drop from $4.3 million this year to $2.8 million next year and the year after. So they're going to get a ton of value on Jake Allen's contract. Once again, the Blues should have retained Allen and done whatever they can to keep him. And the third guy is Alex Pietrangelo. I understand that Pietrangelo is making $8.8 million for about the next decade. That doesn't matter if Vegas wins the cup this year because it was worth it. And the Blues letting the one guy who's ever won the cup as a captain in a St. Louis Blues jersey go under any circumstances, is a total failure in my opinion. I've had a battle with Kurt Price from Let's Go Blues Radio on social media this week. I understand that the fan base thinks that Armstrong made the business decision and they offered him the highest contract in franchise history. That doesn't matter. They didn't offer him the highest contract that he deserved, which would have blown whatever they offered him out of the water. The fact that he's in Vegas right now and probably could win the Cup this year just boils my blood, because he should be in St. Louis still, and we should have given him a blank check and said, here you go, captain. Here you go, legend of our team. Do whatever you want. You're the guy. And to see him succeed still at age 30, 31, he's got a lot of years left on the tank. He's not like David Backes. He's not going to break down in the next year or two because of his physicality. He's a consistent defenseman. He's not like Erik Karlsson, who's broken down. Pietrangelo is going to age well. He could be like Chara and maybe age into his 40s and be a pretty solid defenseman. So I'm very upset that these three Blues are still playing elsewhere when they should all be here in St. Louis. And I just think it's highlighting a lot of failures the Blues have made and why we're sitting at home right now.
I can't disagree with you too much. We could make arguments for and against. So I'm just going to leave that alone. I did just real quick, if we have time, to one more NHL thing.
Yeah, please.
Wax poetic a little bit on the Canadians. I don't think that a Canadian team's going to win the Stanley Cup anytime soon, but just some interesting thoughts on the Canadians. Montreal, and this goes back to the inception of all professional hockey in North America. They have won 25 championships. That is, to me, I can barely wrap my head around it. 25 Stanley Cups. The last time they won was way back in 1993. And in that trip to the Cup, they played and beat the Islanders in the conference final, which is another kind of weird thing about this season. We could have two teams in the final that traditionally are playing in the same conference, and so would always meet in the semifinal, but could not play for the Cup against each other. So I think that's an interesting thing. And just to talk about the comparison between the veteran heavy Knights against a younger team, disregard Carey Price's age, but it's an interesting thing to see how this young team can match up against a veteran heavy team if that's it for them. And it might be a situation not quite the same as Colorado, but Montreal is looking like they've kind of come out of the whole debacle that fans thought of with Bergevin as the GM and making some questionable decisions, PK Subban leaving, and just some of the different things that went on with them. So it's kind of fun to see them succeeding and taking that next step. But I still don't think they'll win a Cup anytime soon.
I'm glad you mentioned that too, because I tried to pull some parallels from the 93 Canadians, because that was the closest thing I could think. When you look at that Canadians team in 93, obviously Patrick Waugh was the goalie and he was the face of that team, kind of like Price is right now. If you look at the best players for that Canadians team that year they won the championship, you've got Vinny Damphousse, Kirk Muller, Brian Bellows, Eric Desjardins. All those guys were under 30. So that was a young 93 Canadians team that if this Canadians team goes deep and somehow upsets Vegas, they've got a lot of parallels to that 93 team that, most people don't remember a lot of those guys as being star players, but that doesn't necessarily mean they can't win.
Yeah, it would be a different path for sure. In 93, they beat the Quebec Nordiques, the Buffalo Sabres, and the New York Islanders to get to the Cup and final and play the Kings. Having beaten Toronto and potentially Vegas, and then potentially either the Islanders or the Lightning would be quite a different path to a Cup for them. But I agree, it's a very similar makeup for their team, and we'll see. Anything can happen.
And it's worth keeping your eyes out, because there's also the little sub-drama of Max Pacioretty, a former captain for the Canadians, now playing on Vegas. That's a whole other element that I think is interesting, because like you said, Bergevin in Montreal has not been afraid to pull some crazy deals out of his hat. And It hasn't always been beloved by Montreal, but it's kind of paying off right now. He's like a mad scientist up there. So, and I also want to mention, I will never, ever again doubt Barry Trotz in round 1 or 2. Barry Trotz always gets his team to play a consistent style of hockey. I never pick him. I always get shown to be completely out of my mind. So, Barry Trotz, I'm sorry. I bow to you. You know how to put together a playoff team. The Islanders are built in your image. I understand. Won't happen next year, I promise.
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't sleep on the Islanders, folks.
Yeah, I won't. So in our bracket challenge, even though we've still got 2 rounds to play, we do have a winner. So I want to reach out to Sal. He's a Twitter follow of ours. Sal won our bracket challenge. He has Vegas beating Tampa. The only people left in our bracket challenge all of them have Vegas winning it. So at this point, nobody can exchange points. So Sal has won the bracket challenge. So congratulations to Sal. I want to let Sal know that I think he cheated off me because he and I had the exact same picks, except for one series, which I picked my heart for the Blues. So Sal, I'm going to take second place, but I think you may have cheated off me a little bit.
Good job, Sal.
Okay, so switching over to we've got some tennis. It's actually probably happening right now on the TV if you're watching. Big semifinal matchup. Dan, I know this is going to speak to you. You love tennis. We've got Novak Djokovic, Rafa Nadal. They're playing in the semi, French Open. Seems like whoever wins that match is going to come out of it and probably win in the final. I don't anticipate Zverev or I always pronounce this guy's name wrong.
Tsitsipas,
yes.
Tsitsipas.
I don't anticipate he or Zverev will take down Federer or Nadal in the Djokovic or Nadal in the final. Question to you. Which guy stands to gain more from their overall legacy winning this matchup? Do you think this means more to Djokovic, or do you think it means more to Nadal right now?
Well, right now, with Tsitsipas did win, so he's in the final. I think right now, if he could win, that would just be huge for him and huge for tennis. Right now, though, it's so hard. How many times has Nadal been a 2 or a 3 or a 4 or a 5? Who knows what seeds? But he's just a clay master. And that left-handedness is just hard to beat sometimes. So even though Joker is the number 1 ranked and probably, I don't think he's the favorite. I think Nadal wins this. And then with Tsitsipas, I think he handles him too. But in the long run, I would love to see Tsitsipas Joker final and be able to crown somebody. Well, I guess Joker wouldn't be as big of a deal as Tsitsipas, but I'd love to see somebody new.
I got to tell you, Dan, I'm dying to watch this match here whenever we get done wrapping up. I think I've got a recording on TV right now. I just think there's something so unique about Rafa Nadal on clay that we've never seen before. I remember back in the day, Bjorn Borg was famous for winning like 4 or 5 in a row on clay, and Nadal's got 13 clay championships. And I wanted to kind of put some historical context on what we're witnessing right now because Dan, obviously you've watched tennis a little longer than I have, but I think we've both been kind of students of the game and the history of tennis. In 2002, when Pete Sampras retired, I told myself, that's it. I've seen the best tennis player I'll ever see in my life. He won 14 Grand Slams. At the time, in 2002, Federer had 0 titles, Nadal had 0 titles, Djokovic had 0 titles. Since that, we're talking about 19 years of play. They've got 20, 20, and 18 collectively between the 3 of them. So all of them have passed Sampras's numbers. They've won 82% of all majors played since Sampras retired between the 3 of them. So it's so unique what we're seeing. Imagine a world where one of these guys doesn't exist with the other 2. I mean, think about how many one of them has if there's only 2 instead of 3 of them combating each other. It's absolutely crazy to me. Yeah. I didn't think that Federer would end up as maybe the 3rd of the 3 with championships, but he's got 20. If Nadal wins today, he goes to 21, or if he wins on Sunday. Djokovic is obviously the youngest of the 3 of them. He's going to probably eclipse both of them if he stays healthy. So it's just really masterful what we're seeing. I also love there's an element of tennis that I love, which is we've got fans back in the stands. I don't know, Dan, if you saw the quarterfinal matchup with Djokovic, but the fans in France were heckling him to the point where they actually had to stop the match and take all of the fans out of the venue so that they could play in silence.
Wow.
It was pretty wild. Djokovic obviously kind of embraces the tennis villain role because he knows that fans tend to like Nadal and Federer more than him. So I think there's an element of the fans are going to be behind Nadal. Djokovic is going to play the villain. How will the fans' interaction play into it? Is Nadal too old at this point? I don't know. There's so much to it. You're not going to get me to pick against Nadal on clay until I see it more than once, which I've only seen it twice ever, and those were in early rounds. He's never lost once he reaches the quarterfinals on clay, so everything tells me Nadal's going to win today, but who knows, right? I mean, it's that's what makes men's tennis so compelling is 5 sets, the endurance, the momentum shifts. There's so much to like about it.
Yeah, and you mentioned Sampras, and back in the day, right around when Sampras was huge was when I was still playing tennis, not competitively, but it still was a big part of my heart, and and even at that time he had mentioned Federer and Nadal, and they even talked about a little bit later on. They even talked about Djokovic. So he knew that these up and coming kids were going to be good. So it's just great to see, and there was 3 or 4 names, also chimed in there. So it wasn't like he was like, oh, I know these are going to be 1, 2, and 3. He just knew that the sport was growing, and once again, it goes back to a GOAT. I really think that term just doesn't work, because greatest of all time you cannot compare somebody to somebody else, especially in tennis. There's no way that you can compare John McEnroe using a wooden racket to some of these guys these days. And it's just you can't do it. But and at the same time, you talk about Nadal, and on the clay court, I'd like to to those who have never played on clay, I'm going to say 95% of people, tennis players haven't played on clay. Well, maybe not tennis players, but novice tennis players haven't played on clay. I would say think about running to a patch of ice and then stopping, trying to hit a ball on that patch of ice, and then changing directions. That is basically what you're doing on clay. Is that you're sliding around, and for them to this is just a favorite of mine. It's I know how Wimbledon on the grass is just so nice, but the speed of a French game with those guys running back and forth is just awesome. So it looks like the match just started. So we'll be able to get some points here soon.
Yeah, and it speaks to the evolution of tennis and really the evolution of like sports science over the last 20 years. Because I remember when Sampras retired, he felt really old to me, though I think he was maybe the age Djokovic is now. I think he was like 32, because in tennis you tend to have a shorter peak or a shorter career than some of the other sports. But yeah, Federer's still going practically at 40 at this point. Nadal's still hanging on. Djokovic obviously is in his prime at 32, and Sampras was retiring at 32. So it's fascinating to see the evolution of tennis over the last few years. We've got a couple other sports we're going to get into, probably not spend that much time on. A couple of big soccer stories. Number one, we've got the Euros taking place. They start today. They're technically Euro 2020, but if we're in 2021, it got delayed by a year, but they're still calling it Euro 2020. Go figure. So, Dan, I don't know how invested you are in the European Championships, but do you have a favorite from what you've seen so far? Maybe a dark horse? Is there maybe a country that you always tend to root for historically that has some significance to you? I'm curious what your take is on the Euros coming up here today.
Historically, with some of my friends that are big soccer fans, I tend to lean towards like the Dutch, the Netherlands. They're always a great team, and I love their orange. I love their orange jerseys when they whip those out with the light blue. Just so nice. And then you can't throw out Italy. Italy usually has a great team, even when they're not projected to do anything. These guys come out of nowhere and they just play with their hearts, and they just play so well. And but right now I think France is going to be a very good contender. as well as Portugal. I mean, once again, I mean, you're looking at teams that are just built on talent. Third team I want to mention would be Belgium. You know, and somebody, you know, a real fan of soccer is going to come to me and say, "Yeah, great choices." You know, way to go off the main list. You know, but sometimes you can't go off the main list. You know, the main list is the main list for a reason. You know, these teams are so good, and you know, it's just fun to watch. And you know, I'm just glad that that they could get it going and all of that. So if I have to predict one team, I would have to say I would have to go with France right now.
Yeah, so there's 24 teams in the tournament. I think that there's a defined kind of like big eight, if you will. If you look at the betting favorites, there's 8 countries that are historically the favorites. So I'm going to run through those 8, which will probably lead you to who you think I'm going to pick, which is you've got the Netherlands up first. They're missing Virgil van Dijk. They're not going to win the championship without their best player, so that's not happening. You've got Germany, you've got Spain, you've got Italy. All 3 of those historically great countries, but they're all young and kind of transitioning in their they don't have really a peak of players right now, so they're kind of in a transition. So I'm going to rule all 3 of those out. You've got Belgium, Kevin De Bruyne, their best player, maybe one of the best players in the world. Not really healthy right now, coming back from a facial injury. I don't necessarily trust them. You've got England as the second favorite to win it. That's a recipe for heartbreak in England. If you know anything about the history of England football, they always lose in penalty kicks, and it always breaks everyone's heart across the pond. To put them as the number 2 favorite is really going to drive a dagger into their heart. So England is going to lose in penalties at some point. It's just a matter of when, which then leaves you with the cream of the crop. Dan, you got them spot on. You've got Portugal, which Portugal actually won the European Championship the last time they had it. They've obviously got Cristiano Ronaldo. Everyone knows Cristiano Ronaldo. However, Cristiano is a much more advanced age in his career. He's not in his prime, which is kind of a shame because there's never been a better collection of individual talent at Portugal around Ronaldo. So I think that Ronaldo could be a very important piece to that team, but he's not the heart of that team anymore. They're a really good squad all around him. And then the favorite for me, it's hard to waver from France. They won the World Cup now 3 years ago. They've got, I think, the best player on the planet today, Kylian Mbappe. He's an absolute superstar. If you look at their starting 11 and their bench, there's not a weakness or a hole in that whole team. There's nothing that tells me that France isn't going to win this tournament unless something really strange happens, though they're also in the group of death. So pay attention to Group F. Group F somehow has France, Germany, and Portugal all together. Those are 3 of maybe the top 3 teams in the tournament. They're all in one group together. So that could create a lot of chaos and determine who ends up where in a knockout bracket. I'll throw out a really quick dark horse. I'm going to go way off the grid. Finland is the team that's going to be my dark horse. It's the first time they've ever reached a major tournament in their country's history, so they got nothing to lose. If you remember back to the Euros 5 years ago, Iceland was the team that had never been in a major tournament, and Iceland ended up pulling an upset on England, I believe, at the time, made a run that nobody expected. So I'm going to say Finland is my Iceland. They're going to be a team that nobody thinks can do anything. They've got no pressure. So they're going to just have fun and play competitive football. And if I have to pick a team I always root for, I root for my heritage, which is Welsh. So I always like to see the Wales team do well. I don't think they have a particularly deep team. I don't think they're going to make a great run, but I'm going to root for them. And then I just kind of selfishly always root that any player who plays for Liverpool, which is the club I support, there's 8 different Liverpool players playing throughout the tournament for different countries. I hope they all play well. Most importantly, I hope none of them come back with an injury. That's all that I really care about. I want a healthy Liverpool team come August, and that's at the end of the day all I really care about. The other big soccer story, it's not definitive yet. It hasn't been officially closed and signed, but all signs point to Lionel Messi on the verge of signing a new Barcelona contract. If you remember last summer, Messi almost left Barcelona, created a lot of chaos. He seems to have mended fences and is going to stay at Barcelona. Part of that contract that's been leaked is that he's going to spend the next 2 years at Barcelona, and then the next 2 years after that, he's coming to Major League Soccer. He'll play for Inter Miami, which is the team that David Beckham owns. He obviously has a connection to David Beckham, two really popular soccer players in the world. Just what kind of message do you think it sends to the world if Lionel Messi comes to MLS? I mean, I can only imagine the magnitude. I wasn't around in the 70s when Pele played for the Cosmos, but it feels to me like a lot of times you see these aging soccer players come to MLS for kind of a last hurrah, get a good payday. It doesn't feel that way with Messi. It feels like he's bigger than the sport to a large degree. I think it'd be huge for MLS to land a name like Messi. It's going to draw people in. It happens to coincide with St. Louis City getting a team, so we might get to see Lionel Messi here in St. Louis. I'd love to see it. I think it's huge for the sport. I'm curious what you guys think. How big would it be for Messi to come to U.S.?
I don't think that there's necessarily a question of how good is MLS quality wise, but I think Messi coming almost gives just like a legitimacy to it that it maybe didn't have before. Obviously, it's been around for some time. It's existed outside of having him involved, but even so, I think, like you said, he's bigger than the sport itself, and having him coming to the United States to play just puts another level of legitimacy to MLS and to American soccer, and you're going to see. I think my 13-year-old has a Messi jersey already from years ago. So yeah, I think it would be really fun to see, and will only make the sport bigger if it happens.
Sean, I'm just going to ask you, do you think, I know you're not the biggest soccer fan in the world, you obviously follow it, to a peripheral degree. If Lionel Messi comes to MLS, would that maybe push you to go to an MLS game here in the city more likely than just a regular game?
100%. 100%.
Yeah. Dan, where do you stand on it?
I've kind of been wavering back and forth whether, for MLS, yeah. We can all look back at Zlatan, and Zlatan came over and just tore up the league. And for the fair weather fan, no clue who he was, but fair weather, everybody knows who Messi is. And if you don't know who Messi is, then you probably don't know sports at all. So for Messi to come here, I don't care how old he is, he's still going to show some of these 20, 22-year-old kids how to play the game. And I can't see that in 3 or 4 years. His speed is going to decrease a little bit, but he's still so hard to match up against. And and this is huge clubs that he's matching up against now. So I just see him coming into the MLS and just exploding with goals, or he could, he is a team player, so he could just start dishing that ball off and and getting everybody else recognition, because it would be nice if the Miami has Messi, who is who scores 50 goals this year, but what would also be great was that they have Messi, who assisted in 27 goals this year, and player X and player Y have 14 goals apiece, or that, because once again, you don't want them coming in and just being your whole club. You want the support around them that can work back and forth. So I would love to see him here. Personally, I don't see why he would come, other than a payday, and I didn't think that he would actually need a payday. So it's kind of a weird, kind of up in the air kind of thing. Like, I don't know. I'd love to see him come, but the question is, why is he coming?
So that's a great question. I'm glad you asked that. So technically, when he comes to Inter Miami, he'll still be a Barcelona player. He'll be on loan, and he'll be acting as an ambassador for Barcelona in MLS. So it's Barcelona's opportunity to, and then after he plays 2 years in Inter, he's going to go back to Barcelona and be an ambassador for life for that club in a future role after a player. So I think it's Barcelona's way to try to branch out as a club and say, hey, American soccer players, come to Barcelona, because I think they're seeing that there's a young crop of talented American soccer players here, and having Messi, everyone's going to want to go to play with Inter Miami because they're going to want to play with Messi, and then by proxy, they're going to want to play for Barcelona. So I think it's a smart move for Barcelona, and I think it makes sense to a degree for Messi. I'm glad he's doing it. I was very not happy last summer when he was talking about going to Manchester City or talking about going to PSG. He's been with Barcelona since he's been a teenager. It just feels natural for him. He clearly loves the club. Do whatever you can to get over the bickering you're having with the president of the club. Make it work. The fans adore you. He's a god at Barcelona. Just, stay. I think it's a cool story. So I'm looking forward to it. Sean, I think you're spot on. It legitimizes MLS to a degree that it's never been at. And I'm a selfish sports fan. I had one opportunity in my life to see Lionel Messi play here in St. Louis. It was leading up to a World Cup, and Argentina came to town and played Bosnia. And the week prior to that, he got hurt with Barcelona and pulled a hamstring. And so they showed up to town, and Lionel Messi was not on the plane. And I practically cried myself to sleep because I had seats like 4 rows from the pitch, and I was excited to get to watch Messi in person. And he shows up. It doesn't show up to the event because he got injured. So I'd like to see Messi here in town. We're going to get to our final segment now, which is our food for thought. So this is a chance for us to kind of get one last thing off our chest that we didn't get around to this week. Do either of you guys have a food for thought before I jump into mine? Okay. So mine is specifically related to a sport that is very near and dear to my heart. It's combat sports. It's mixed martial arts. And I think there needs to be a spotlight on it because there was an event last week that even if you're not a mixed martial arts or combat sports fan, I'm sure you heard about, and that is Logan Paul fought Floyd Mayweather Jr. in an exhibition boxing match last Sunday. You can call it a circus fight. You can call it a blight on the sport, whatever you want to call it. It is what it is. However, people paid $50 to see this fight, and it did 1 million buys, which the fact that 1 million people paid $50 to see an exhibition fight between a guy with a 0-1 record and a retired boxer in Floyd Mayweather kind of speaks to there's an element of personality that you have to capture somebody's attention in combat sports. And even though I don't particularly like Logan Paul or Jake Paul, his brother, there's something about the Paul brothers that I do want to point out that I admire about them. What the Paul brothers bring to combat sports is they promote themselves. They do all the hyping for themselves. They make all the money themselves. And the reason why they're important to combat sports, even though it's a bit of a circus, is the money that they bring in shows these guys in the UFC and guys in other promotions that you need to take more control over your career and make more money for yourself. And the Paul brothers have been very outspoken about the UFC pay structure. And I want to highlight the UFC pay structure, because there's currently a situation going on with John Jones. He's the former light heavyweight champion. He moved up to heavyweight. He's maybe the greatest fighter in UFC history. John Jones is in a huge public contract dispute with Dana White, the president of the UFC. He thinks he should be paid about $10 million for his next fight, which is a heavyweight title fight. Dana is saying he doesn't deserve that money and he's scared to fight. And the reason why it's important is because John Jones and all these UFC fighters are seeing Logan Paul go out there and make $30 million for an exhibition fight and saying, where's my cut? Why am I not making $30 million? If you look at the revenue breakdown between all the different sports, I want to highlight the revenue breakdown. So NBA, NHL, NFL, Major League Baseball. The breakdown is either 50-50 or about 52-48 between the organization and the athletes. So in the worst case scenario, the athlete is making 48% of all revenue in all of the big sports here in America. Now we'll get to the UFC. I'm curious. I'm going to put you guys on the spot. What do you think the percentage is of revenue between the organization and the athletes in the UFC? How much money do you think the UFC makes in that pie?
80-20.
Okay, what about you, Dan?
I'm gonna go a little bit higher, saying 90-10.
So it's in the ballpark of 85 to 90% of all revenue goes to the organization and the UFC. And so the fighters are only making 10 to 15% of all revenue that they're bringing in. And then they also have to pay their camp, they have to pay their trainer, they have to pay their nutritionist, they have to pay for their own airfare, and they don't get health insurance because they don't have a union. So these UFC fighters and these MMA fighters are scrapping for, thousands of dollars when they're seeing their counterpart, Logan Paul and Jake Paul, making $30 million. And so while I don't necessarily love the Paul brothers boxing that they're doing, they are bringing light to the combat sports world and saying you need to take more control over yourself. And so I want to say to everyone who loves combat sports like me, you've got to stop watching UFC events in terms of paying for them, because all you're doing is paying to line Dana White's pockets, and you're paying to line the people at ESPN and the people at Disney who own the UFC. Those people are making the money, not the fighters that you love watching. Unfortunately, those guys are still scrapping and clawing to make any money. So I would urge everyone, boycott the UFC, because it's going to hurt them more than it's going to hurt the fighters. And I know that's a hard stance to take, but you know, the fighters can't do anything because they're under contract. They don't have a union. That's partially on them. There's a whole backstory to the unionization of the UFC that George St. Pierre tried to do that didn't work. But, you know, until the UFC and the fighters can get a union in place and actually take control of the revenue, it's got to stop, because it's really bad right now, and it's not getting better anytime soon. And these boxing exhibitions are only highlighting that. So I just wanted to bring that to the forefront, that I am an advocate for pro-union, pro-UFC fighters making a fair cut of the revenue, and I'm tired of it. And I'm not purchasing UFC events for that specific reason.
Yeah, the contract obligations notwithstanding, the current structure is going to have Dana White and the UFC fight themselves right out of business, because they're not going to be able to sustain the kind of fighters and the quality of the bouts if they have all of these guys who are not making enough money to survive or to pay off all of their people, and you have Dana White refusing to give them a fair share. I think ultimately you would see a larger number of people boycotting, a larger number of people avoiding that kind of thing, and you'd be left with a league that has contracted employees that they can't put into matches and make any more money off of, and then, you know, the rest is just history.
Yeah, and what's hypocritical about it to me is Dana White is obviously very focal. He's a very big focal point on TV, because obviously they have the ESPN deal, so they show him on SportsCenter all the time. He likes to think that he's holier than thou. There was a point in time, probably 10 or 15 years ago, where I thought Dana was kind of a truth speaker, but I've since found that he's more of the carnival barker, if you will, and he's happy to spread lies and disinformation to hurt his fighters. And he actually, I saw him in an interview. Somebody asked him about the Mayweather-Paul fight, and he said, it's terrible for the sport, and I need to go to boxing to clean up boxing. And I thought, that's the last thing we need, is Dana White to get his hands into boxing and turn boxing into what the UFC is slowly becoming, which is this huge inequity between what the organization and the fighters are making. And so I saw a lot of UFC fighters tweeting during the fight on Sunday night saying, there's something fundamentally wrong here when I'm not making $30 million to put my body on the line 26 times, and Logan Paul's going out there and fighting 8 rounds that is a fight that has no judges, no winner, and he's getting $30 million. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And so I think these UFC fighters, their eyes are opening, and that's good for the sport. So I'm encouraged by that. So as hard as it is for me to say, I hope Logan Paul and Jake Paul keep fighting and keep making money and keep maybe giving these UFC guys opportunities to come over and fight them, because that's all that really matters is those guys getting paid. All right, well, that's going to do it for this week. We appreciate you spending time with us. Be sure you subscribe to our channel on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, and we will be back again next week.
Here's to 50 more.
Yes.